future. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. It is July 15th, 2022. Yes, we are back from a 2-week hiatus, summertime, family vacay. Yes, welcome to Raging Chicken's Friday Politics Roundup. This is, of course, Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. I'm slowly kind of finding my way back into the chair, which feels really, to be honest with you, feels pretty damn good. Very happy to be back. Each week we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can help support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress. You can also help out the show today by heading over to our YouTube channel, if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for the show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. We are up to 210 subscriptions. I am totally freaking psyched. That's awesome. Been looking to break over that 200 subscriber mark for a bit. And want to just keep on building from there. We got an election season coming up. We're hoping that we're going to start bringing on some candidates. We're going to start bringing on some campaign officials, start bringing on some organizers that are going to get us geared up for all the organizing that needs to happen between now and, well, let's face it, after, this past month, between now and infinity, right? Until we actually get to the other side of our revolution. Want to say a special shout out to Kirsten, Alyssa, Venting, and Bucks County Beacon this morning for the shout outs. Help get the word out that we are back in the seat. And want to remind you, like none of us, right, should let Paul Martino and his friends buy our schools. That's right. And we don't want them to be pushing extremist politics in our community. Raging Chicken has teamed up with Level Field to launch a truly community-rooted PAC to invest in organizing, support local and statewide progressive candidates, and unmask the toxic organizations infecting our communities with really this right-wing extremism. We're putting small dollar donations to work to beat back the power of big money. You can get more information and drop your donation at ragingchicken.levelfield.net. And just a couple kind of updates on the Raging Chicken pack for this, the Don't Let Paul Martino and Friends Buy Our Schools pack, or Raging Chicken pack. Basically, we're for the remainder of the summer that we're going to bring on a couple people as a kind of team of let's say call it like political advisors or PAC advisors, right? Basically to help us kind of generate some ideas about what's going to be the best way to kind of spend this money to be most impactful on the races coming up. Now, this is a 501c4 PAC, so which means that we will not be coordinating with any political candidates in particular. We are speaking from the voice of the progressive community and looking where we can find our have an impact. We've said right from the get-go, and you can find this out at ragingchicken.levelfield.net, that our goal is not only to be directly supporting certain candidates or opposing certain candidates, but also to invest in helping build the infrastructure. In other words, all that door knocking, that deep canvassing, that the stuff that is proven to actually have impacts in communities, people on the ground, the stuff that generally the consultant class tends to ignore, but we know from our own experience here in Bucks County and across Pennsylvania, right? Anybody who's doing kind of on the ground organizing knows those one-to-one conversations, that on-the-ground organizing in the communities is the money best spent. And so we want to help support some of those efforts too as well. Lots more information on that going to be coming up. We're going to be talking about it. We're probably going to do some stuff for our patrons, maybe having some of our advisors come on, maybe some of the organizations that we're hoping to support come on, and we'll be off and running. Well, on today's show, look, we've got a lot to catch up to, and, in going over everything that has happened over the past couple weeks, there's no way that I'm just going to go through and run through a litany of things. As much as, and I'll be frank with you, as part of my vacation, I purposely, tuned out for a bit. I mean, of course, Anybody who's involved in, pays attention to politics is never going to go away from it entirely. But in terms of with the kind of intensity that I have been more reading and not thinking about how would we come back and talk about this on the show. So today is really kind of a get back up and running stuff, looking at a couple things that are popping up, a couple things that we're looking forward to taking a look at. We'll dive into some of the news of the week and go on from there. The chat is open today, so if those folks who are kind of jumping in, if you got things that have been happening, you got events that are coming up in the community, please make sure that you let me know, and we'll give it a boost here on the show. We'll give it a boost in chat, put it in show notes, and help get the word out. That's something else that'll be important, especially, look, if you want to know another way that you can contribute as a member of this show, or as not even as a member, but even as a listener of the show, as events are coming up, right? Just drop them in chat, right? Even if you can't stay for the entire show, you got something that's coming up, that's going to be important. You got a candidate that you want to plug. You got some information that you want to share with the community. Just do let me know and drop it in chat, and we'll kind of give it a boost here on the show. The other thing I've been considering doing, I've been thinking about this for a bit now, is bringing on some of the kind of like some of the call-in aspects of the show too as well, but we'll get to that in a little bit, maybe today, we'll see. But anyways, for more PA progressive talk, PA-based progressive talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern, the YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook. Look, wherever you get your streams, you're going to find Rick. That's for sure. You can subscribe to his podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Just head on over to thericksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms and help support Rick's incredible, important show. Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. You've been listening to it? Sure as hell hope you have. These folks right now deserve our support more than ever. In the light of this recent Supreme Court rulings, you got to make sure that you're going to head on over to the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. You can find it on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house. And they know where their bodies are buried. And they're organizing in the communities now. So make sure to follow them on Twitter at the Night Caucus and subscribe to their podcast. For all you gamers out there, the Game In is a Quakertown-based Black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything for retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, and loads of collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops. And kids get discounts with, during the school year. And they do good they do good in school. How good is that? Fantastic. Check them out on their Facebook page. Follow them on Twitter at The Game In. You got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, shoot them a message or drop them an email at The Game In or thegameinpa@gmail.com. That's thegameinpa@gmail.com. Special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at Song of Dayman. That's at Song of Dayman on Twitter. And look, everybody, we want a progressive future. We need progressive media. Support Pull No Punches, homegrown progressive media today by becoming a patron of Raging Chicken for as little as $5 a month. Simply go to patreon.com/rcpress. We got rid of Trump, and now the hard work of building progressive future begins. We are here for the fight, and we need you. Become a patron for the price of a good beer once a month. Help keep the media in the movement and the media. Become a patron for as little as $5 a month by going to patreon.com/rcpress today. Well, everybody, welcome to the show once again. We've got some announcements already right in. Kirsten is jumping in. I'm just going to read what she's got here. Perfect opportunity for folks who want to help out Dems but aren't ready to canvass or phone bank. The Bucks County Democratic Committee needs some help building the thousands of Shapiro lawn signs that just arrived. Oh, great idea. Simple, straightforward piece of cake. Right, the Bucks County Democratic Committee office is in Doylestown, and all next week from 10:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. they need folks to help put together lawn signs for distribution. Let's see, it's totally boring, she says, but it's a kind of task that we need volunteers to do. I'm gonna twist that a little bit on you, Kirsten. I'm gonna say the act of putting the yard sign together itself, yes, that is a little bit tedious, right? You just put it together and it's rote stuff. But the importance of these kind of events are twofold. One, yes, it's necessary work that needs to get done. But two, you're sitting there and have the opportunity to connect with and meet all these other folks that are also kind of contributing to the campaign. I'm telling you, we had we've talked about this on the show so often, and I'm drawing a well, if you remember when we had Daisy Pitkin on, right? Daisy Pitkin was on the show, and about her just amazing kind of book, right? It was I can't believe I'm spacing the name of the book right now. Hold on, let me put it up. Daisy Pitkin. I'm sorry, Daisy, if you're listening, because that was On the Line. Okay, I had it right. I basically said it. On the Line, story of class solidarity and two women's epic fight to build a union. As I've said 1,000 times before, and I'll say it 1,000 times again, the Daisy Pitkin's book is just an astounding book. It's the kind of book that doesn't come along very often, written from an organizer in an honest assessment of kind of that experience of organizing, and it's beautiful, and it's tragic, and it's heartfelt and important. One of the cases that she makes in her book, another reason why you should read it, is that Daisy says that a lot of times when people are thinking about organizing, they kind of get it wrong, right? Especially when you get into kind of professional organizers and unions and things like this. And she's like, it's not that it's just wrong, but what happens is that when people think about the question of solidarity, right, what builds those connections between people, is that it's very often the case, or it can be the case in many, say, union organizing campaigns, or more broadly, right, that we think about solidarity as this kind of like this amorphous thing that is kind of like an ideology, right, in the realm of ideology, like because you identify with that worker out there, right, that kind of idea, this really amorphous sense of solidarity. What Daisy says is that solidarity is built through the kind of events that Kirsten just pointed us to. The daily, often repetitive, sometimes arduous, sometimes thankless tasks of actually organization building, right? And building those connections and those things, right? She talks about these moments of kind of having sitting in cars and waiting to kind of for workers to come out of the, come out of their shifts so they can talk to them, or trying to track down, going doing house calls and then, nobody being there, nobody wanting to talk to them, or missing the person again, right? These things that would constitute failure in our kind of like efficiency driven ways of thinking about virtually everything in this country. And those things, what Daisy would, I hopefully I'm getting this, she would echo this, that, those things are not failures in the large scheme of things, because they're part of your building those relationships with people, and you're building that kind of collective experience, right? And so it's not, if you're doing it all by yourself and all alone, yeah, that's one thing. But if you're doing it with people, and she was arguing too as well, as sign making, putting all these things together, showing up even for the kind of small demonstrations where you're kind of getting out and you're kind of meeting people. Those things is part of that process of building that solidarity. So while I get it, Kirsten, where you say it's totally boring, like the kind of task that gets boring, but it is absolutely essential. And I'm going to put another plug in for doing this week. One of the things that has frustrated me too as well, just as this is just kind of like as an individual trying to help support a candidate by putting a yard sign on my lawn, right, is that very often it's incredibly difficult to find the yard signs. I remember during the Hillary Clinton's campaign, for example, it was practically scandalous in Pennsylvania about how difficult it was to get a hold of Hillary Clinton yard signs and other supporting materials in Pennsylvania. There were several organizers, some out in Pittsburgh, some up in the Lehigh Valley, some in just outside of Philadelphia, who eventually told their stories where because the way that the Clinton campaign operated from the top down in Pennsylvania, they were using all these kind of analytics and data stuff and everything, and they thought that they had a lot of this stuff wrapped up. right? They thought that Pennsylvania, they didn't need certain kinds of resources, and they didn't need to build out their infrastructure and invest in local committee people. I remember talking to a woman who was down in outside Philadelphia. I want to say Montgomery County, but I might, I believe she was in Montgomery County, and she talked about how that she was the head of that kind of district's campaign, right? That county might have been, I don't know if it's Montgomery County, but she was like the point person, right? She was the point person on the Hillary Clinton's campaign's kind of sheet or whatever tree of organizers, and she could not get any space. She could barely get any volunteers allocated to it, and she couldn't get yard signs. And so what she ended up doing is setting up a tent on her front lawn, right, and making their own, right, because they couldn't get a hold of this stuff. And this was happening. And again, this was just one of these specific things. I mean, there was a lot about that, that year's campaign, obviously, not just everything that was going on made it big, but this was one of those things where that the idea of this kind of top-down analytics approach as opposed to the bottom-up approach. And there's always this perennial debate about whether or not yard signs mean anything, right? And I always think that the question and the assessment of their effectiveness, let me put it like that, is generally the way people talk about assessing the effectiveness of yard signs. They have it in the wrong way. Let me see if I could break this down for you a little bit. I was trying to explain this to some folks on some other campaigns. This is a while back. This is during the last presidential election, about why I thought yard signs were kind of important. Generally, the way people talk about yard signs is they think about them through the realm of persuasion, right? That is, they ask the question, if you put yard signs on there, does it persuade somebody who's in the neighborhood or who's driving by or something like this? Does it persuade them to vote for that person? And I think it's pretty clear from most of the data and the evidence that when they try to answer that question, it's ambivalent, right? You don't know, right? I mean, it's hard. It's hard. It's like, figure out, does a billboard work? Right. And you can have these kind of secondary or passive ways of kind of thinking about it, or figuring out if they saw the sign and whether or not that kind of caused them to take an action and that kind of stuff. So there's people who suggest yes, and people suggest no, and so on. So that's one thing, right? The second thing is, does it encourage voter turnout? Right? If you have those signs out there. And again, it's the results are kind of ambiguous, right? In part because, like, how do you exactly measure that, whether a person was going to turn out or not, right? You have to use these kind of like, I don't know, like 2 or 3 questions removed way of getting your answer. You can't directly determine it. You can't get in somebody's like a subconscious brain to figure out if it works out. Anyways, so, but the way I've always come at this is kind of like this, is I live in, as you know, if you've been listening to the show, I live in Bucks County, right? I live in an area that is particularly conservative, right? Where down the street from me, there's like this kind of like, former horse farm, run by kind of a bigwig in the local Democratic Party. And he's got this white fence that runs around his corner property, right? That's the corner of Callow Hill and Main Street or Branch Road, depending on which one you're looking at. And he's got this big white fence that goes all around his property, and he puts up those 8x10 sheet plywood signs right on the corner during election period, right? And now, since Trump was elected, those signs have barely ever come down. Right now he's got like, this house loves God or whatever, God is love or whatever the hell it is, right? It's like what the Mastrianos people are using to kind of try to divert attention away from the fact that he's a fascist. So anyways, so those signs go up, right, routinely. And right now there's Mastriano signs. Mastriano signs have been out since February, right? And just to give you a sense of some of the discussions that I've had with people in my community about those signs, is the impression it leaves is that this is a conservative area, right? That Democrats can't win here, right? That the right wing is like just dominates everything. Okay. And that's just at the level of passive perception, right? If you ever play D&D, it's your passive perception, right? It's that kind of thing that, you're not actively thinking about it. You're thinking about what's going on. So when you read that, and there's there. Now, what I found out, right, was that, I was pretty surprised to learn at one point that there were quite a few Democrats in my area, right? Even in my neighborhood, right? I was looking at some, of these kind of maps of the area, and I was like, oh my God, I had no idea. And then I realized at that point that, someone like me, even like that, has these little hesitations or assumptions that I'm making about other people that are in my neighborhood. I'm thinking that they're all Trumpers, right? I mean, not actively, right? But I'm thinking there's a lot of them out there, right? And when I actually saw the data, I saw that, well, actually, it's kind of split. And there might be a slight lead Republican, but I'm looking at these maps of how people are registered, and there's like a lot of Democrats that I had no idea that were sitting in my neighborhood, right? But the only signs I see are Mastriano signs or some other ones, right? And so what this does, what the yard sign does, right, is it signals to other people in the community that they're not alone. That maybe it's okay to talk about this. That maybe, hey, I didn't know you were a Democrat. I saw you supporting Shapiro. It's also an opportunity for a conversation. Right? So where a campaign is generally focused at this kind of top level analytics about, dollars in, spent versus output does, translates to votes kind of thing. Where I think yard signs are effective is in that what I was just talking about, that dynamic of breaking through the kinds of assumptions. And like I said, I was startled myself, both at the number of Democrats in my neighborhood and on the flip side of it, my own subconscious perception or assumptions about how conservative my neighborhood was. You see what I'm saying? And so that's where I think these little things, these signals are really important. In a different vein, there's I wouldn't go to that. So that's what I want to get on. And Ross says, yes, bingo, dead on. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. That makes sense. That makes sense. Oh God. Kirsten also says, like, these signs, there are some people who feel that they are throwing their vote away if they pick a candidate who does not have visible sign presence. Absolutely. Right. They're looking at, look, we have all sorts of assumptions that we make in our brains, right, that are not at a strictly conscious level, right? But there are assumptions about the way that we exist in our culture and the way that politics work, right? If I see that there's this one side that has all these signs, right, and I see there's no other signs for the other candidates, right? It's easy to assume, again, at a less than fully conscious level, right? Just in terms of, like, again, passive perception kind of thing. It's easy to assume that those people with the signs are going to win, right? Regardless. And it might influence whether or not I think it's worth kind of getting out and voting on those particular days, right? That's we don't know exactly. Where I think, once again, what the most important part of it is it signals to other people, right? It signals to other people that, hey, you're not alone, and here's an opportunity for points of connection. And if that's a way that we could help build community, that's great. And and frankly, I've been thinking a lot about this over during my vacation. It was like, for so long, in parts because of where I work. I work out at Kutztown, and here it's an hour away. And right as soon as we moved to the community, we had kids. We didn't know anybody except for my wife's family, and then we got lucky. We had some really good neighbors. But I was really slow to kind of get to know people here locally. And in part, I was also very active in my union at that point, right? I was an elected member of our union. So my focus was out at work, but it was like an hour away, right? And it's at these points where my kids start getting involved in school, and I start get involved with what's happening in the community and start realizing, man, it's not easy to meet folks, right? I mean, yeah, you can go to a kind of a bar and hang out, but I was like, I don't know. I just don't, necessarily like, so either I go by myself, right? Because, and then, or my wife and I go and we hire a babysitter where we pay this extra money, you know what I mean? So it's like, we had young kids and that was all kind of going on, right? And plus, and then there's just added random kind of personal stuff. It's like, I'm fine in an organized context and things like this, but, I'm not like the best person in the world that goes out and kind of, introducing myself and meeting people and doing that kind of stuff. I mean, I know it might seem kind of counterintuitive given the fact that, here I am in this freaking podcast and all this, but it's true, right? But, all those little things. Anyways, the whole point being is that in that context, right, kind of new to an area, have kids, don't really kind of know where to get involved. And at that time, I have to say that the local Democratic club, I was having trouble finding, right, or different progressive organizations I couldn't find on either social media. I remember emailing. I used to get these emails from Bedminster Democrats, right? I don't know how I got on the list, but I got on it, and then I would try to email them back, and then I wouldn't hear, and it was like that kind of thing. So I was like, I kind of felt I was floating out there, I meet people here and there, but it is what it is, And so now it's like, I just think about, imagine if during those periods of time, especially when, I had yard signs up when we first moved because it was 2008. And it was like, during Obama's election, I had yard signs. I put them up on my yard. They were taken and destroyed multiple times. Right. So, that's also formed a lot of my assumptions. Right. And when election times have come around for school boards, everything, nobody ever came to my door. So I was like, there's limited ways of, finding folks. And then now, in part because, new leadership has been kind of taking over Penn Ridge Democrats. They're much more active. You had active school board campaigns and things like this. It's a lot easier to find those folks, right? It's a lot easier to kind of get out and reach them. And remarkably, yes, people are showing up at my door, knocking on my door, like campaigning for Gwen Stoltz, right? Campaigning for Shapiro. They're showing up on my door, right? It tells you that the people are kind of organizing and kind of on the ground, which is pretty awesome. Anyways, I got so far off where I was starting. So Kirsten, but I have to say, thank you for bringing that up. Again, I want to reemphasize that for people who've joined kind of since beginning of the show, that the Bucks County Democratic Committees, their office is in Doylestown, and all this week from 10:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. they will be putting together signs for the Shapiro's lawn signs. They just arrived. They need volunteers to help out putting signs together. And I'm going to see, and so Kirsten, if you could just drop me all next week. Okay, so good. So that's Monday through Friday, I assume. So I got it's supposed to be rainy a couple of those days too as well. So it's a good opportunity to get with some other folks and do this. Sounds like a great opportunity for my kids and me to do. So sounds awesome. Fantastic. So yeah, that was a really hopeful way of doing this. Chuck says, yeah, I tried for months to join the Penn Ridge Dems before succeeding. It's gotten better though. Yeah, that was exactly, Chuck, that was exactly my my experience initially when I came here. And again, I want to be clear. I don't want to sound down on local organizers, these small kind of localized committees and things. Look, what's been clear to me is that the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania as a whole, and this goes for the Democratic Party writ large, has not seen the importance of investing in kind of supporting, say, local chapters of places. That's not the primary concern, right? They're much more concerned with the analytics and this consultant class and this top-down kind of way of kind of approaching things, when what we need, of course, is that kind of bottom-up stuff. So, a lot of times what was happening, in my understanding, to in like the Penn Ridge Democratic Club, for example, the Penn Ridge Democrats and so on, is like one person, right, who was trying to kind of put out like a newsletter or email list just so people kind of knew what was going on. But it was very sporadic, right? And look, people have lives, right? And if you're trying to help support a local chapter of the party, right, trying to create something, and you're not getting support from that organization, like I'm talking like monetary support, material support, like office support, things like that, then it's difficult, right? And if you feel like you're alone and that kind of stuff, it's here. Now, again, this is kind of like the blessing in disguise, I guess, of what's happened with our school boards, is that our school boards have kind of forced to the to the top the issue of needing to organize, right? And there's just been spectacular organizing that's been going on, and like we've said on the show so often, is that what's happening in Bucks County is pretty much the model, right? Not that it's the only place that it's happening, but this is the game plan that we're going to see rolling out. This is our testing grounds for the right-wing extremism, right? We're seeing it firsthand. We got it early and we're getting it often, which is basically forced a lot of folks to kind of step forward and kind of start organizing. And I'm so glad to have that in my community now, where people are out. We had, just right before I left for vacation, there was a fantastic rally, right, in Sellersville, right on the main street in Sellersville, right kind of across the street. Well, actually, in the Four Corners where the Washington House is, kind of right in that area. And I said, okay, look, I'm gonna go down there. I posted some pictures. People may have seen them up on Facebook and Twitter and so on. And I want to go down there just to kind of like, I want to be with people, right, at this time after the Roe was overturned, and I want to be part of it. I did not expect that many people to be there. I expected there to be a decent turnout given the gravity of it, but it was packed. I mean, you had the Four Corners were full, right? You had Gwen Stoltz had come down, right? She gave a great speech. Was there. We had Jim Miller came down, who was running in the Pennsylvania 145th against Greg Stats. He came down and he talked there. It was absolutely fantastic what we got in terms of turnout, and even more than to say the political candidates coming down. What was even more important, I thought at least, was having the community come out. And not only did the community come out, but you had representatives of the campaign show up with with yard signs. So guess what? I have an Ashley Ahas yard sign now because people brought him to that rally, right? If people had not brought him to that rally and had thought about that at that rally, then I would not have that. And I would be still thinking probably now after coming back okay, how do I get my hands on some of that stuff? Who do I contact? Who's going to actually have them? Who's not going to blow me off? That kind of thing, right? And I have to say, I have not put the yard sign out yet, in part because I went away for vacation and I didn't want it kind of taken while I was gone. So there. Chuck says, yes, it's almost a truism that the GOP is, quote, so much better organized, unquote, than Dems. Do you think that's true? And what are the differences in local and state Republicans' approach to organizing? It's a great question, Chuck. So, look, I think, and this is kind of one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit over the years with Raging Chicken, both on the podcast and before then on our site. It has to do, I think, with... there's several different things, right? Let me start with like this venue that we're in right now in say in media, right? One of the things that the Republicans have understood for a long time is that you need to have spaces where you have consistent messaging, right? Where you're messaging and kind of points of discussion, right? To help form a community of people in the kind of off season, if you will. Right. So in other words, where Democrats tend to be focused primarily on media leading up to an election, right, the Republicans and the right wing more broadly, and I would say probably what we're seeing here is evidence more of a more organized right wing rather than organized Republicans. The organized right wing in this country has understood that for kind of a long time. The Republicans have kind of played footsie with the extremists for a while, and now they're just one and the same. But the right wing in this country has been organized in terms of what it thought it needs to invest in. Right. This goes back. This goes all the way back to the post World War II, post New Deal era, where people like the Kochs, right, and people like these really rich folks, the libertarian folks who were really on the fringe of American politics, recognized that they had an unpopular message and that the country was going in an opposite direction and that they were going to need to dig in and build for the long term, right? And that's what they did. So like over the years, there was the Powell memo, for example, which has gotten, it keeps on getting brought to the surface again, which I'm very happy about. Lewis Powell, who became a Supreme Court justice, basically, before he became a Supreme Court justice, laid this out to other kind of, right-wing kind of capitalist-oriented folks, right? Basically said, here's what we need to do. The college campuses are a problem because they're teaching them to kind of think for themselves, basically, right? We're seeing this in the art world. They're seeing it in the media world. They're seeing kind of more progressive that is not friendly to the kind of capitalist message. So therefore, we need to kind of break that down. And we need to invest in these things. And they did, whether or not you can look at this as the marching orders, right, or just an accurate kind of diagnostic, a diagnosis of what they saw as the problem. What you saw in the Powell memo played itself out over the past 50 years. Right. So what the right wing, the people with money on the right, began doing is investing in institutions. They started investing in, they started buying up, for example, as FM started going up, they started buying up AM radio stations, right, and putting them under one ownership. And then they would basically support right wing media, right. Of course, you've had the Rush Limbaugh is the kind of classic, person who's here. But what the right wing would do is not try to just pick the one person to give money to, right? They would invest in, and still do. They invest to say, okay, we want to make sure that there's right wing people on TikTok, for example, right? So we're not going to kind of try to find the right person on TikTok. No, we're going to give money to a whole bunch of people. And a lot of that money is going to go to people that will not be successful, right? But if we give money to 25 people, right, and support their platforms, and we end up with 5, right, when it kind of in a year after it clears itself out, that's money well spent, because now we got 5 people who are on our hook that are going to push that message, right? And they did this. They built their media at the top level, and they built their media at the local level. They also invested in putting money into organizations in communities that they found important, like churches. Right. So, you had all this kind of organization that was going in. They understood the need to build infrastructure for the long haul. And they knew that it was not going to pay dividends immediately. Right. Milton Friedman, for example, who was the, Chicago school economist who basically authored the kind of neoliberal, model for limited government and free reign capitalism, right? The idea that you kind of defund the public state, you defund the public, and they shifted all to privatization. The whole idea that the market solves things better than the government, that's all Milton Friedman stuff coming out of his book, Capitalism and Freedom, and that whole school of economics. They understood at the time. Capitalism and Freedom is a great read, by the way. It's a hard read in some ways if you're looking for something that's just going to confirm your reality, because it won't. But it shows you it was the model which they were thinking way back then. One of the things that Milton Friedman understood was that if you have a public that is against your message, that your message is unpopular, right? What you have to do is that you have to invest, you have to get everything in place, right? So that when a crisis hits, right, it's those people with we call the ideas lying around, who had the ideas to respond to that we're going to be able to come in and help, solve that problem. So there's a national disaster, right? People are kind of all kind of like up in there. The schools are wrecked and all that kind of stuff. What does it mean? Well, if you have a ready-made package of people that are going to come in with a proposed solution and say, oh, look, there's no money in the government, because you've effectively helped kind of preach the anti-tax kind of line of things. There's no money in the government. So what are we going to do? Here's this privatization scheme, and this is how it will work. We could privatize the schools. We could do X, Y, and Z, right? And they did that, right? They also learned that you don't need to wait for a disaster, right? They learned that you can create them. And how do you do that? Well, if you take, just say, for example, the DMV, right? The motor vehicles, right? Where you go there. If you can defund that, right? Defund that organization, right? You can kind of, so that there's fewer and fewer people employed there, right? And you let their computers kind of get old, right? And you don't approve updating of those computers. What happens? Well, the systems start to break down. The lines get longer. People get more frustrated, and they direct their ire at the DMV. Because that's clearly an institution that shows that government is bad. It can't do anything right. It's inefficient, when really it's been defunded. That's what they've been trying to do to the post office for the last 20 years. Well, let's say really 15 years in particular. Right? So that was the whole idea. And then you have, well, what are we going to do? We're sick of standing in lines at the post office. What do we do? And then, these people, these ideas lying around, and their institutions to show you, here's our studies that show you that we can privatize the post office, and we could do this. We could privatize the DMV, and we could do this. Or we can outsource these functions to this company, right? And then people start saying, well, maybe we should try this because clearly this is not working, right? That's the way you create the crisis. Right? That's what's happened in the state system of higher education, right? Where I work, right? You look at all the charts, right? You know, we went from, in 1983, about 65% of the state system of higher education was funded by taxpayer expenditures, right? People pay their taxes and went in there, and that supported this stuff, that anybody could attend this. And so it only cost like a family, a person attending it and their family would only cost them about, say, 25%. There were some other things that were kind of funneled in there. Right? Now, 75% of the cost is borne by students and their families, where only about 25% is borne by the state, right? Or our taxpayer dollars. Because we've been convinced, and I use we lightly here, we've been convinced as a state that it's more beneficial to kind of keep our money in our pockets and get the government out of our pockets, right? Taxes are bad. So we defund the state system of higher education. And what just happened to the state system of higher education? Well, they shut down basically, they consolidated like 6 schools into 2, right? We've been in a state of perpetual kind of like lack of investment in our programs, constant cutbacks, constant kind of like retrenchments, right? And you can see it coming. And it's a choice. It's not an act of nature. It was a systematic choice over the years by the Republican Party and a well-funded right-wing intellectual and media infrastructure. Right? So that's a very, very long answer to that first part of it, Chuck. I'm sorry. The rest, but it all follows from that kind of mentality, right? Is that what if you actually talk to some of the Republicans and Democrats don't run their campaigns, right, in terms of like their campaign infrastructure all that much differently. The difference is that somehow in the right wing, which has a hold of the Republican Party now, right, they know, right, that they feel at least that, well, let me put it this way, they have an ideological clarity that the Democratic Party does not have, right? The right wing the right wing / GOP, right, has that kind of clarity. And so they see, right, their campaign as a cultural battle, right? And a cultural battle does not stop. It doesn't stop with an election cycle, right? They are in what is essentially an organizing cycle, right? Where everything that happens is another opportunity to kind of push their message at all these different levels, right? And they have some big funders. So what happens with their funding is that they say, we're going to dump a bunch of money into yard signs, right? And we already have the distribution network set, right? So we don't have to do like what Kirsten does, right? You kind of say, okay, look, we're looking to bring people together. People already know, right? And not just the people just on the inside, right? The distribution networks know yard signs are coming in. They're hearing about it in their churches. They're hearing about it in their organizations. They're hearing about it in their newsletters that they get, right? And they're flooded with messaging about when all this stuff is coming up, right? And they're well funded. Those signs come in, people already geared up to get together to do this, right? To talk about their candidates, to talk about we're going to take stuff back, right? They're charged up. They don't care that it's a meaningless task because this is part of their organizing, right? It's built into what you're seeing on the right wing. And you have multiple locations, right? We have, for example, Andy Meehan's organization, Right for Bucks, right? Right for Bucks, as Amy Connect has reported, as she's kind of attended one of their online kind of events. Uh, they are actively teaching everybody. People are showing up to their events, and they're actively teaching them, how do you get involved with local politics? How do you run for these open Republican committee seats? How do we take back or how do we take over the Bucks County Republican Party, right? How do you run for local office? Right. Let me train you in how to gather signatures. Right. They're already doing this in that. Right. And this is an organization that is not a Republican organization. This is an independent organization run by Andy Meehan. And Andy Meehan, what does he have? Lots of money. Right. The same thing happens with Paul Martino. Right. Paul Martino can drive a conversation. Right. One person, one billionaire, millionaire, whatever he is, could drive a conversation and drive an agenda by sinking tons of money into the organizing efforts behind it. Right. And that has an effect in the Republican Party. What's happening, interestingly enough, I believe, and this you can certainly argue with me about this. I believe what is essentially happening to the official Republican Party is something that had happened to that the Democratic Party kind of did actively kind of some decades ago. And what has happened is essentially the Republicans, and this comes from talking to some Bucks County Republicans that I know who've worked at their kind of more upper levels, is that they thought for the longest time that people like Andy Meehan, people like Paul Martino, people like this, they need to keep them close because they have money, right? But their more extreme stuff, they were just going to kind of ignore and let them do their own thing because they thought they were extremists, right? And in the meantime, what Andy Meehan started doing, and some of these other organizations started doing, is they started training the ground troops, right? The door knockers, the organizations that were going to go and they're volunteering to show up for those candidates, right? And he trains them well, right? And that organization has started to kind of self-perpetuate, right? There's a group of folks on the right wing and the extreme that are kind of organized door knockers, where the Republican Party in Bucks County has basically said, oh, look, well, we don't need to quite invest as much time into kind of doing the door knocking because, look, Andy Meehan's doing it for free, so I'll just let him do it, right? It's just kind of like, it's being done already. We don't need to worry about it, so we're going to take care of it. Or so we let him take care of it. But now that's caused a problem because you've contracted out part of your party's organization, right? And that's happened across the Republican Party, kind of nationwide too. They said, oh, look at these extremists. Like, we were going to keep a distance from them, but we're going to let them do all the kind of work and rile everybody up, right? And now they're on the inside, right? The extremists are on the inside. There's something like, 20-something Proud Boys that are running for office this year, for example, on Republican Party ticket, not in Pennsylvania, but nationwide. That's something, right? And so now what was happening during the last election, or kind of like after the first year or something, I remember talking to this one person for the Republican Bucks County Republicans who was saying, yeah, this is bad. This is bad for our party. And we don't know what we're going to do. It's going to either split it or they're going to push out all the moderates, and we don't know what's going to happen. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do? And he's like, I don't know. So people seem to just want to let it go. And I think what you can see has happened in the Bucks County Republican Party is actually they've actually started to embrace the more extreme stuff, right? The stop the steal stuff put that over the edge, and said, okay, we're just gonna have to throw in with the Trump crowd. So we'll see. Democrats, on the other hand, they started doing, and there's a lot of complex reasons for this. There's this book that just came out that I'm waiting to read that is going to that breaks down something as the cycles of what happened in the Democratic Party. But the version of it is that if you think about it like this, especially as the Republican Party becomes more ideologically like an ideological monoculture, right? If you're part of that brand, right, that white identity brand, right, then you've got your playbook, right? On the other side of stuff, right, in a democracy, right, people just don't have one of two positions on things, right? So the Democratic Party has been the default position for everyone else, right? At least, not the super extremists, right? Not on the right wing that are anti-Republican Party too as well. But anyone who's kind of on the kind of the pro kind of we are democracy thing. We have a complex culture. We have a complex kind of social framework, right? That is driven in a large part by free market capitalism, which produces all sorts of kind of like inequities and abuses and exploitations. And you have, of course, the long histories of legacies of slavery, right, of patriarchy in this country, that have produced all these kind of, things that are not in the status quo, that are people struggling to kind of are struggling to get together. And so the Democratic Party has kind of seen itself sort of over the years as a place where it was going to try to bring these things together, right? And one of the things that they did is they broke with the labor movement, right? They said, the labor movement used to be a strong core of the Democratic Party, not just in terms of like people who are Democrats, but rather in terms of determining policy, right? And in the 60s into the 70s, they started breaking away from that, right? And so they said, no, we're also going to be, there's some of this anti-labor stuff that started sneaking into the Democratic Party too as well. Anyways, but what the Democratic Party did, instead of basically saying, as a party, we are going to try to bring everyone together and try to develop an agenda, right, that deals with a range of all this difficult stuff, right? Instead of doing that, what they did was contracted out issues to different organizations, right? So they said, okay, instead of basically saying, let's argue these things out, they said, okay, NAACP, you're going to do race, right? We're going to have this organization, these several women's organizations are going to handle this kind of stuff. These organizations are going to handle, the unions are just another kind of identity politics that are going around there. So all that stuff is going on at the same time. And the core of the Democratic Party, especially during about the 1990s into the 2000s, becomes, from my view at least, hollowed out of any kind of ideological coherency, right? So instead, it becomes this technocratic and bureaucratic organization that is about kind of like maintaining a majority or trying to get people elected, but in a kind of like almost get elected in something that's devoid of ideology. So it makes it very difficult to have a message that is consistent about what is a Democrat, right? What does a Democrat stand for, right? And a lot of times people today will say, well, they're supposed to stand for, right? Because that's one of the groups that they hear. Or they're supposed to do this, or they're supposed to do this. And right now we're seeing, because of what's happened with the loss of the right to an abortion in this country, we're seeing that old leadership, the Biden administration, the Nancy Pelosi's, all these people who have been at the leadership of the Democratic Party during that period of hollowing out. What they found that has happened is now they don't have a coherent response. I mean, Kamala Harris got up and said, like, well, we're going to really work hard to find what we could do. I mean, it's like, where's the freaking outrage? Where's the outrage? I mean, I get it that we're at a point now that it's too freaking late. The Supreme Court has already overturned that. So now we've got to rebuild all over again when it comes to kind of the right to an abortion in this country. But the point is that the Democrats, if you had an ideological core that you were a defender of abortion rights, right? If you had that, if you were a clear commitment, it's a no-brainer in terms of how you respond to this. And if you see it coming, like in February or whatever it was, February or January, they dropped the draft of the Supreme Court stuff. If that's a surprise to you, and it shouldn't have been, but if it was a surprise to you, you would have come up with about 17 different scenarios about what you will do and how you will act. And when the actual decision dropped, boom, 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 you let them all come out. Boom, abortion clinics on federal land. And people were like, oh, we don't know if we can do that. No, you just do the freaking thing. You do it, and you let the court come back and say, no, you can't do that. And you show it again. You demonstrate the illegitimacy of that organization. That's what you do, right? You do everything. I mean, the fact that they're still talking about trying to figure out what they're able to do for almost 3 weeks after the decision is insane. The same thing happened, same thing after the murder of George Floyd. Right? After the murder of George Floyd, Clearly, it's clear what you need to do. Police are out of control. You need to kind of stop. What? Let's see. We're going to cut off all military surplus equipment going to police departments. Number one, right? Number two, you are going to deny federal funding to help support any kind of police thing that has any police department that is that has a record of this kind of racial misconduct. Number two, right? I mean, you could, one after the other could have come out. Right. And yes, I understand during then that wasn't the president at that point, but any kind of Democratic leader at that point should have been come out. Instead, what did they do? Oh, we like the police. We need the correct training and we don't. It doesn't respond to the crisis at hand. By trying to act like, oh, we got to figure out what we can do and maybe we should do these things. No, they rolled out these kind of wishy-washy, bland talking points from the 1990s that was really a part of what built up the crisis, that built up the kind of policing crisis in here, right? So that's my point. It's like instead they said, okay, we're just going to be these kind of like. We're going to see some ways that we can just kind of try to keep a quote unquote coalition together by saying all these wishy-washy things, right? And their language became more and more devoid of meaning. And I hate to say this, but the Obama administration basically made this like official. The Obama administration, if you ever read any accounts of it, it's really fascinating, especially for when you're talking about what happened to all these groups. The Obama administration basically put together this way of bringing activist organizations together as a whole, and it looked like the beginning of what could have been a coalition for his government, right? A really, really strong coalition, like in terms of like policy people and all this kind of stuff. But after the election, right, he actually had, and part of this had to do with the people that he had in the White House, had to do with I try to purge this guy's name out of my head all the time, the dude from Chicago. It'll come back to me, but basically to say, okay, now we don't want these groups to have any undue influence on Obama's thing, so we're going to basically cut them out of the policy making. You did your job, you got us elected, now go home. And they literally cut them out of the process. Yeah, Rahm Emanuel. Thank you, Kirsten. That's what they did, right? So that was kind of like the completion of that hollowing out. So not only are we going to contract out all the major ideological and policy work to these organizations. Now we're going to actually cut them out of the decision-making process, and we're going to rely upon one charismatic individual and people around him who are the kind of technocrats to try to solve this problem because they're the smartest people in the room. That was in air quotes for those people who are listening on our podcast. So that's kind of what I think is going on. Chuck, I'm sorry about that. You say you kept on getting kicked out of the live stream. I'm not sure what that's about. It's not me doing it, I can tell you that. That's for sure. But he says, I think door knocking is huge, and we ought to look at mutual aid events and actions that build affinity with the party. I agree, and I think that at this point, the idea of doing it from a kind of progressive perspective, that is not necessarily doesn't have to be 100% with the party, right? And I'm not saying it's against the party, but I'm saying these are kind of these like affiliated kind of groups within there. If the party's willing to do it, that's one thing. But my concern right now, until we see a really significant shift in the Democratic Party or people, a meeting of the minds, even at the local level, when they kind of start to say, okay, yes, we need to agree upon this particular agenda. It's good, to have this, consider this a kind of an opening up of a broader progressive community, because you think about it, progressives are generally the activists that are kind of going to show up again and again and again. And so we need to have these spaces, especially at a local level, where they're not being kind of cast out by these kind of quote official Democrats, right? Because the official Democratic Party loves to beat up on progressives. And they'll be like, I mean, how many times we need to hear Nancy Pelosi say that we need a strong Republican Party and go out and basically campaign to have a strong Republican Party, while in the next breath she's basically like attacking Ilhan Omar for kind of like saying that Israel created war crimes, right? I mean, come on. I mean, this is just like, we have to remember that. Yeah, agreed. I'm just trying to see if I can catch up here on anything that I missed here. Ross also says, been out door knocking for the school board regions in April, May, and June. And now for Gwen, I'm talking to many unhappy Republicans, several who are no longer voting Republicans, but even one is switching. We're going to see how that plays out, right? There's been some interesting data that the majority report was talking about, I think, last week, where they were asking people, and there's dissatisfied Republicans that are kind of like really upset with it. But when you push the question about if Donald Trump was, just as an example, Donald Trump was going to run again here, would you vote for him? The vast majority of times they're voting yes. So you're talking again only on the extreme margins that you're going to see this. We are going to see some of this, and I think, Ross, you're onto this. Is that you're absolutely correct that we can have probably a greater impact on that on a local level too as well, because you're actually having conversations one-on-one with people, right? So there you go. Wow, this has been great. I really appreciate everyone kind of jumping in on the chat today. This is fantastic. I mean, I had some stuff keyed up here that, I don't even necessarily need to get into. I know people have been talking about a lot of stuff been going on with the budget. The budget got passed. It was only a week late this year, and to say only a week late as a positive thing is kind of funny. But better a good budget than no budget, or better a good budget than a bad budget that's on time. So I could really care less about the on-timeness of it. I care more about what's actually in it. One of the things that I thought was, I just wanted to be clear, is that now during this budget season, there's just been so much going on, but I want to underscore one reason why it is absolutely critical that we do not allow Doug Mastriano to become the governor of this state. I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons why, right? Like, I mean, from do we give a shit about democracy, right? Do we want a kind of a religious zealot, right? A Christian nationalist to kind of be at the head of our state, right? No. Do we want kind of to watch abortions be kind of eliminated from Pennsylvania entirely? No, right? So here, but I just want to give you kind of clear, but it's bigger than these things, right? So while Friday, I guess it was last week, right? Last week, Wolf signed it's a $45 billion budget and associated bills with language that creating new programs for education, mental health, public safety, tax relief, along with spending $2 billion in federal aid for water and sewer projects and affordable housing and home repair. By the way, I'm reading that from Peter Hall's excellent article in the Pennsylvania Capital Star. So just so you know, I'm really fair. What I really wanted to kind of like highlight this piece a little bit here is because what he did is said, okay, in addition to signing that budget, right, which got a front play, there were some key vetoes that he did, right? So it says Wolf has since vetoed 4 Republican-backed bills and signed at least 5 bills that were closely watched in the days before the budget process. What the governor's office did: 1, the Senate voted 30-20 last month to approve a bill banning transgender girls and women from girls and women's scholastic sports, despite Wolf's promise to veto it. It passed it, right? Wolf vetoed it, right? Wolf said he said in his veto message, the legislation discriminated against a vulnerable group of students already susceptible to bullying and depression who are at risk for suicide. Even if it were enacted, the legislation would have faced legal challenges for violating federal law and constitutional guarantees of equal protection. Right. And he said the LGBTQ plus community in Pennsylvania and around the country, and especially our transgender and non-binary youth and young people, I see you, I support you, I respect you, and I stand with you, Wolf wrote in that message. That's critical. All right. So 1, if Mastriano, let's be clear, if Mastriano was there, that would have any Republican, frankly, who was in office for governor would have signed that bill. Second one, This one was I was deeply concerning to me, because this is something that actually this had happened during the last election cycles, and now is going to be codified. On poll watchers, Senator Doug Mastriano of Franklin County, the Republican nominee for governor, introduced legislation to allow registered voters to serve as poll watchers anywhere in the Commonwealth rather than in the county where they are registered, as the law currently requires. So, in other words, you could basically have a core group of people that are well funded, say in one particular part of the thing, and they go out and have a team of people that are going to be poll watchers, and they are basically poll watching mercenaries, right, that are going to do this. The House State Government Committee chairperson, Seth Grove, advanced the bill on June 22nd, said poll watchers serve as checks and balances on the election system, and that giving candidates more access to the polls was a good thing. Right? Wolf said in his veto message that the bill would make it possible for bad faith partisan actors to target specific locations and groups of people to make baseless challenges to voter qualifications, making it harder and slower for election officials to do their jobs. That is the issue. What had happened during previous elections now, we started to see the resurgence of this, and there were some great stories and coverage of this stuff. They started going after, they're sending basically these white, right-wing militia folks into primarily black precincts in Philadelphia and some other places to intimidate voters, to threaten them, to sit there. Sometimes they'd show up with their AR-15s, right? Shit like that. And so that's what they were trying to codify into law. Mastriano and those folks were trying to codify into law the ability to do that, right? Wolf vetoed it. About energy sources, Senator Gene Law of Lycoming, whose district covers a wide swath of Marcellus Shale country, introduced legislation to prohibit municipalities from restricting the types of sources of energies that consumers may use for their homes and businesses. This is a climate issue, right? A climate issue is basically saying that you say, look, in my area, right? Because we saw this, right? Some of the ways that communities were fighting back. We actually had we had some discussion about this, about the rights for nature. We had talked about this on the show for kind of a while ago, and we talked about some communities that are enacting these kind of like home rule charters. They're basically saying we get to decide what happens in here, and there's going to be no fracking allowed in our community, right? And essentially the same kind of thing to say no coal burning fuel, no coal burning sourced energy is allowed in these homes. So if you as an energy company, you want to supply energy to this, you want paying customers in our district, you are going to need to you can't have coal, right? And so this bill, and Gene Yaw, who's the chairperson of the Senate Environmental Resources and Energy Committee, was hilarious. That he put that bill this past Monday, Wolf vetoed that bill, saying it would create an impediment for municipalities to address the threat of climate change and stand in the way of energy incentives and initiatives, which, let's be clear, the local and the statewide stuff is all that much more critical now that we have basically like King Manchin, who's basically blocking all. This is one of the stories I had keyed up for today. Manchin just basically walked away from talks about climate stuff, basically say he's not signing on to anything. We are in dire straits when it comes to the climate here, and this is like one of the few stopgap measures that we can actually kind of deal with is on the state and the municipal level, and Gene Yaw's legislation would try to take that away. Home health care. Wolf vetoed a piece of budget-enabling legislation known as the Human Services Code Bill because it included language that would have prevented the Department of Human Services from contracting with vendors to provide financial management and payroll services for home health care providers. He approved the remainder of the language after it was amended, blah, 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 right? Again, another little small thing. He vetoed that, basically saying that would have prevented the Department of Human Services from contracting with vendors to provide financial management and payroll services from home healthcare providers. Zuckerbucks, I love this one. Wolf signed legislation on Monday banning county boards of elections from soliciting or accepting money from elections administrations from individuals and outside organizations. It also creates an election integrity program, a grant that will provide aid to counties to conduct elections. There's a bunch of other stuff. He passed some stuff on bridge tolls and stuff. There's a bunch of stuff in here. He passed something on affordable housing, signed it, education funding, and so on. Those are the ones that were signed and stuff like that. The reason why I want to point to the vetoes, because like that's it. right? And we already know that if Mastriano gets elected, that we're going to see kind of abortion bans legislation that's going to be coming forth in Pennsylvania. The only stopgap that we have on that is to ensure that we get a Democrat in the House. Josh Shapiro has come out strongly in defense of women's right to an abortion. Again, we've said on this show multiple times, when Sean was on the show, we talk about this a lot. We've got, significant issues with Shapiro in terms of its politics and things like this. But let's look. One, he has promises, or he's actually, he's going to defend some of the key things that are going to be defensible, that we need defended at this point. Number two, he seems to be willing to take up partisan fights when necessary, which is absolutely critical. And number three, he's got a political organization, ideally, right? Although his campaign is really shaking some of my confidence in his team of advisors, but that's all going to be critical taken to the governor's office. At the very least, Mastriano would be an absolute utter disaster, right? We have the opportunity to have somebody in that office that we can push, right? That we can work for, that we can push to be kind of more progressive, or we could be on a completely defensive kind of like, feudalistic struggle against our feudal lord, Doug Mastriano. Those are our choices at this point, in my mind. So that was key. Kirsten just said it's a heads up notice. Indivisible National has some ads in the Intelligencer and the Courier coming up next week about Fitzpatrick's awful abortion record. Can't wait to see the ads. Me too. That's not a pun. Just I'm also looking forward to that. Pretty awesome. I don't know what's going on with that. That's not good. Okay, let's see what else, if I had other thing I want to throw in before we head out for the day. Oh, the mansion stuff. I got this. I want to flag this. This is something that where did it go? Let me pull this up here. This was, if you remember, we had Sarah Aniano on the show a few weeks back, and she had sent this out earlier today. And again, why it becomes critical to be involved locally. So this is a story that comes out of Iowa, it is Ty Rushing's article from the Iowa Starting Line. So what's happening with the Vinton Public Library? Now, I know I don't expect you don't need to get out a map to figure this one out, but just listen to the first opening paragraphs of this, and this is the key thing. Residents of a small Iowa town criticized their library's LGBTQ staff and their displaying of LGBTQ-related books until most of the staff quit. Now the town's library is closed for this foreseeable future. After having the same library director for 32 years, the Vinton Public Library can't seem to keep the position filled anymore. Since summer of 2021, the Vinton Public Library has gone through 2 permanent directors and an interim director who has served that role twice. Located about 40 miles northwest of Cedar Rapids, the doors of the Vinton Public Library, housed in a brick and stone Carnegie, have been open to the public since 1904, but were shuttered on Friday, July 8th, while the Vinton Library Board tries to sort out staffing issues seemingly brought on by local dalliances with national culture wars. Right? It comes from after this is the key, a handful of locals whipped up a controversy first over the library displaying books about prominent Democrats, and later about it displaying LGBTQ books and having LGBTQ people on staff. Attacks on LGBTQ books and people and those from other marginalized communities have been part of a nationwide trend marked by homophobic right-wing activists stoking fears by trying to lump those materials to try to keep on going here. There we go. Sorry if you heard a little blip on this. It looks like there was a little network issue on my end. We seem to be back. But basically what the issue is when it comes to what's happening at the in Iowa, we've seen this already, and we actually previewed this on the show earlier in the summer, that libraries seem to be another one of these places what they're going to go after and kind of attack. And again, it's got several things going on. One, you can enable the culture war. Number two, it's a public institution which they can try to kind of take this away. Yes, Cyril, I agree with you. Cyril just jumped in. What's up, Cyril? So this is what fascism looks like. So I agree to you 100%. This is what we can expect to be happening in our local communities too as well. And the way, to go back to our discussion earlier in the show today, this is the way the right works, right? Is that they will test things out also in these kind of local areas and in these small locales, right? And they will kind of and then they pass it on, right? Sometimes it originates from some think tank. Sometimes it originates kind of in one place and decide to share with each other. And they start to say, yes, this is where we're going to go for our next line of attack. They are always organizing. They're always on. They're always looking for the next level of attack, which is where we're going to have to be kind of moving forward. Anyways. Yeah, so that's kind of what I had. The only other thing that I said, just to prove that there's they can get stuff done when they want to get stuff done. Well, Politico reported a couple days ago that the House of Representatives actually found an amazing, passed a major piece of legislation. And it seemed to, looks like it may be moving forward. It was part of a bipartisan amendment, right, to show you that bipartisanship too can work. Yes, I'll just read. This is from Politico. The House on Wednesday voted to create a secure government system for reporting UFOs. Yes, that's right. For reporting UFOs and compel current and former officials to reveal what they might know about the mysterious phenomenon by promising to protect them from reprisal. The bipartisan amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, passed by a voice vote without debate, is part of an aggressive effort to exert more oversight over the enduring intelligence-gathering challenge that has gained more attention in recent years. It was proposed by Representatives Mike Gallagher, Republican of Wisconsin, and Ruben Gallego, Democrat of Arizona, who've been among a vocal bipartisan bloc of lawmakers pressing the Pentagon and intelligence officials to take the issue more seriously and to be more transparent with Congress and the American people. Yes, everybody, we can now expect access to information about reporting UFOs. Yes, so there you have it. See, there's hope. Anyways, everybody, and I think it's going to be a good time for me to check out, as I seem to be having some network issues on my end too as well. Hopefully, I'm going to get those straightened out in the days to come. Also, I should say one more thing about show notes. My daughter's, I mentioned this earlier, my daughter's the summer soccer stuff is over. So what I'm going to start doing is transitioning back into, yay, Monday night out to Coop Live. I'm so excited. I've already had like 4, I swear to God, over vacation, I have like 4 people contact me and say, hey, we'd love to come on the show. Hey, we'd love to come on the show. And I'm like, I'm on vacation. But that's great news for us, right? So kind of moving forward, we're going to be able to go back to our Monday nights. I hope to be able to kind of start addressing, I have a bunch of outstanding stuff that I need to kind of get done for Raging Chicken. And so I hope to be putting some attention into that in the coming days and weeks and months. So for all of you out there who've been fighting the good fight while I've been kind of away, kind of like just basically wave jumping on the oceans, right? The ocean side. I appreciate all the work that you all have been doing, and I hope that I can be able to do what I can to amplify the work that's going on out there, and we have lots more to come. So everybody, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Thanks for tuning in to me on this welcome back to our Friday Politics Roundup. I'll look forward to hearing more what's happening in your community. I want to remind everybody once again what Kirsten pointed us to at the very beginning of the show. If you're looking for a really nice, easy opportunity to benefit, organization efforts towards this election coming up, this midterm election, you can head on over to the Bucks County Democratic Committee office, which is in Doylestown, all next week from 10:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. They will be assembling lawn signs for Josh Shapiro for governor. Thousands of them just arrived in the building, and they need some volunteers to help put them together. You can just show up, say, hey, look, I'll put some stuff together. Great opportunity to meet some folks. Great opportunity to help make sure that those lawn signs don't just sit in a floor for ages, but actually get out to the lawns all across our county. All right. So everybody, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Thanks for tuning in again. And hopefully I'll keep you updated about what we're going to do on Monday. We'll be back to our regular schedule as much as possible for the remainder of the summer. Look forward to kind of hearing everything that's going on, joining you in the streets and joining you in the organization efforts. I appreciate all of you. Thanks for the shout outs. Thanks for the retweets. And thanks for being part of this community. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. We're out of here. I think, if this is going to play. There's no music playing. I have no idea why that's happening. Let me try this again, huh? This is the kind of the way things end. This is how it ends, right? Oh, look at that. For a reason, it was not playing live, but here, we're going to start it again. How about that? All right, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Always stumbling my way back into everything. We're out here, everybody. Forward to seeing you. Love y'all. See ya!
I'll